I don't know if you can hear me and if you can understand my English, but I know that there is a way to have a simultaneous translation. So, Dr. De Souza already introduced the subject very well, so there is no need to tell you what synesthesia is. Actually, the word sounds a little bit like anesthesia, one of the Romanov princess, but as we said, synesthesia describes the activation of a sensory modality involving at the same time the cross-activation of other unstimulated sensory modalities, interconnecting different cortical areas of the brain. And it can involve two or more sensory modalities, although we mostly use the term referring to sound to color type, more properly called chromesthesia, as we have seen in one of the slides before. Sound color synesthesia is far more common than color sound synesthesia. So I don't know how many of you have ever had this kind of experience that you see colors while listening to sounds, listening to music, because actually it refers to different auditory experiences, not just music, but also normal sounds, speech, just simple phonemes or normal sounds. These kind of sound color pairings have been discussed for centuries, of course. But as Dr. has already said, it's important to underline that these combinations are highly individual, highly personal. Although they are, what word did you say? Constant. Constant. So there is a famous discussion between Skrjabins and Rapetti, reported by Rahmanov, describing this discussion on synesthesia, because they both thought to be synesthetes, and they were absolutely convinced of their own perceptions. And Rachmaninoff says that actually the pairings, only three sounds had the same color, so basically they were both convinced about their own pairing, which was constant for them, for each of them, but they didn't match, so they were not the same. So chromesthesia is not rare among musicians, especially connected to that specific kind of long-term memory called perfect pitch. I don't know what you say in German.
Absolute.
Yeah.
Absolute.
In any case, whether synesthetes or non-synesthetes, we all make pseudo-synesthetic associations. For instance, we associate with, you mentioned something, high-pitched sounds with lighter or brighter colors, and low-pitched sounds with darker colors. Of course, if you hear this, normally one is not prone to associate it with yellow, but maybe yellow is more clear, right? So, Skrjabins chromesthesias involve a specific correspondence between colors and tones with their relative keys, combined with different symbolic values. And Kandinsky, on the other hand, spoke at length about the relation between colors and instrumental timbres and their effects on human psyche. In this beautiful painting, we can already see this contraposition between red and blue we'll discuss later on. In his essay on Skrjabins Prometheus, published in 1917, symbolist poet Constantin Balmont introduced the neologism Světasvuk, which which means light and sound. And we used this title, this neologism, in a book we published in 2018 called Suono Luce, together with my colleague, Dr. Luisa Coringa. And it's interesting to notice that in Russian, the two words to denote color and light are almost the same, sviet and tsiet. So it's very easy to confuse them. And very often, Skrjabins' Symphony of Light, which is Prometheus, is translated as Symphony of Colors. So symphonic connotations were already inherent in ancient languages, as we can see from the very word chroma that we used in many ways. And in ancient Greek, it meant at the same time skin, complexion, color, and also scale, melody, more in general. We normally use the term color in relation to timbres, tone colors, keys, modes, pitches, chords, and ornamentation of a melodic line when we say coloratura. And of course, the term comes from the Latin word color, which comes from the verb colere, which means to hide. And the etymology of this word suggests the idea that colors, in a certain way, hide the very essence of things, in a little bit like our skin conceals our inner self. So the first three colors that have been identified by men are white, black, and red, and have been already used with an artistic purpose in Neolithic cave paintings. Here I kind of invented a painting in the style of Malevich, who used these three colors extensively at the same time as Skrjabin. Strictly speaking, black and white should not be considered real colors, as we all know, because white results from the absence of total absorption of visible light, black, and white is the reflection of all the visible wavelengths of light. And since the time of ancient Egypt, the two achromatic colors, black and white and red, have been given important symbolic values related to life and death. It's interesting to notice that for Kandinsky, black was, he called it silence, silence of death, and white is silence full of potentialities, like sleep, basically. So it's like a dead silence and a life silence. And of course, red was a metaphor for the vital energy. Now, Skrjabin was very fond of exoterism, as we know, and according to ancient alchemy, which he certainly studied, matter gets transformed following three stages that have these three Latin names, nigredo, albedo, and rubedo, from the three colors, black, white, and red. And they correspond to the different stages of the fixation of matter. So matter can also it can be a metaphorical term to denote many things. And thank you. I used these three colors that we find in some pieces by Skrjabin. These are the only colors we find specifically mentioned in the 7th, 9th sonata and in the pieces we just heard. Thank you, Marcus. To define the three styles of Skrjabin. Now I won't discuss all this, but we can just pinpoint the fact that synesthesia becomes a pervasive element in the final stage of his production, which of course has musical, specifically musical correspondence. Well, when we talk about synesthesia, we have to remember that, of course, we are talking about mostly about promesthesia, because taste is almost never, probably never mentioned. I don't remember if I ever saw anything related to taste in Skrjabins' writings. And touch has always an erotic connotation. So the two main sensory channels are sight and hearing. Well, Skrjabin, who loved the Mediterranean Sea for its bright light and warm climate, considered the period spent in Italy as the turning point of his artistic evolution. And in 1905 he moved to the little village of Bogliasco on the Ligurian Riviera near Genoa. And it's so funny because also Kandinsky was there at the same time, but they never met. Kandinsky was living in the town of Rapallo, which is just 10 miles away, roughly. And of course the Riviera was a very inspiring place for the composition of the poem of Ecstasy, which deals with this sense of bright light. But of course it was quite a novelty for a Russian composer, you can imagine. I don't remember where I took this quotation, but once Skrjabin said, "What dreams sometimes I have, but they are not dreams, they are visions, illusions that become tangible, sounds which are paintings." And the color sequence in Prometheus can be actually interpreted as a sound painting unfolding in space and time. And we could actually think that this is a Kandinsky's painting. So, in the third synesthetic period, the composer got more and more involved with the writings of Elena Blavatsky, the Russian theosophist, who in 1886 actually reported in one of her articles some cases of synesthetic perception, explaining them as a result of the evolution process of human races. And in Über das Geistige in der Kunst, Kandinsky declares his own involvement in Blavatsky's theories. Significantly enough, the famous text, Kandinsky's famous text, is contemporary of his very first abstract watercolor, and at the same time to Skrjabin's Prometheus, 1910. Prometheus can be considered the very first multimedia composition, including a not well specified keyboard for light. For both Skrjabin and Kandinsky, theosophy was important since it encouraged the awakening of man's senses through the study of nature and the investigation of truth, contained in all religions, especially Hinduism, myths and philosophies. For Skrjabin in particular, the search of the eternal truth and its new messenger destined to restore divine harmony brought him to identify himself as the new artist messiah, a new Prometheus bearer of fire. And in this sense, as Pasternak remarked, Skrjabin was a deeply Russian composer, probably the most Russian composer in this sense, since Messianism whether religious or revolutionary or simply crazy and criminal, like in the case of Putin, has been for centuries a typical feature of Russian culture, stemming from its Orthodox tradition and from the concept of sobornost, the spiritual union of the Orthodox people. In this slide, we can see Skrjabins' personal combinations of colors and tones. So the two primary colors, this blue is not actually very blue, but are at the extremes. And so that's the widest distance between the two sounds, which corresponds to the tritone, which is the larger interval dividing the octave. Now, we could actually try to see what you think and what you experience. Thinking of this kind of perfect color wheel. As we can see, for Skrjabin, the note and actually the key of C, but one of the main faults is that there is no definition of major and minor, so we don't know. Is major a darker hue of red and whatever? But in any case, this key for Skrjabin evoked the color. I mean, he immediately had this kind of red sensation or perception or perception. I don't know what's the best term to use in this case. For me, for instance, it's completely different because for me it's not red. So I don't agree. I have some synesthetic perceptions quite often, but nothing corresponds to Skrjabin's key, so it's very interesting. For him, for instance, the other main color, so the primary color, red, was this. And of course blue, sorry, I gave you red, I gave you a yellow color before. As you see, I'm misplaced because I don't feel the same. So this is red for Skrjabin. And this is blue. Or we could say darker blue. We can also note that when we play a major chord, we tend to play it louder. Minor, we all do this. We wouldn't do this the opposite. Why? Okay, let's leave it as it is. So I don't know if you, during the first part of the concert, we played the Allegro and the famous Etude. They are both in the key of E flat minor, which corresponds to D sharp minor. And for instance, for me, they correspond to two different colors, but it's actually the same key and the same sound. But already thinking in terms of flats and thinking in terms of sharps give me a different kind of feeling, you know. So I don't know if after hearing so much of this, you had any kind of idea or whatever linked to some colors. But for me it's absolutely great. And but of course it's different if I think of her etude, which is in D sharp minor. So it's still this, but it's not great. So that's another. I don't know if we can make some more examples. Also, because when we talk about triad, we should also talk about more complex harmony. So, is probesthesia linked also to more complex harmonic structures? Certainly, it's very much linked to the sense of tonic, not a tonic, the basic sound of the triad. So it's like something on which we build something, and that gives like a root. So the root of the chord is what conjures up these synesthetic perceptions. Now, for Skrjabin, as we said, C corresponded to red, and it had a specific symbolic value. We have to remind that in Russian, the idea of red is strictly connected to the idea of beauty. And the two words are almost the same, krasny, krasivy. So red is a very important color in Russian culture. Both pieces, the poem of ecstasy and the poem of fire, which are the most important in a way symphonic symphonies by Skrjabin, have a similar structure. He creates a very mathematically perfectly structured sonata form, which is just an accumulation of a humongous accumulation of harmonic tension that never resolves. Only at the very end there is this explosion of perfect major keys. So we have an explosion of C major at the end of the poem of ecstasy, corresponding to red, of course, and an even bigger explosion of F sharp major, corresponding to the light blue. The only difference is that in Prometheus, Skrjabin specifies that he wants the colors projected in the hall. He wants the people to be absolutely wrapped up in these synesthetic perceptions. And there is a correspondence with all these lights and what he wants to express, which of course is a state of almost hallucinations, like a musical orgasm in both cases. Skrjabin had many perplexities dealing with the color blue, because this color, which is linked to spirituality and transcendence, is quite hard to define. The Proto-Indo-European root of the word blevos means light. And it's not surprising that blue has often been identified with the light itself. And you can see, for instance, the very word blank, which comes from the same root. In what I noticed is that in many northern countries, there is a tendency to use the term blue for both dark blue and bright blue. While in certain southern countries like Spain and Portugal, they do the opposite. They use azul to define both, which is of course a clear, a brighter color, to define the dark blue and bright blue. Now, a very important question: was Skrjabin's synesthetic perception real? Was he a real synesthete? Probably yes, to a certain amount. or was he's a kind of a rationalization of a synesthetic idea. Now, in a paper published in 2007 in a scientific congress, a scholar said that, which is absolutely correct, that probably Skrjabin did not fully experience synesthesia. Why? Because his scheme of colors and sounds is too rational and too much based on the Newton's scheme. Which we find there. This is the rudimental machine he used. It's in Moscow Skrjabins Museum, which he used to experiment, different lights. So, and there is the corresponding combination in Newton's treatise. Of course, it corresponds exactly to a rainbow sequence. Thank you. And we go now to the final composition, the final utopian composition. Skrjabin never realized. He only composed the prefatory act, not completed, but it can be performed. He was trying to compose a magnum opus that was absolutely irrational in a way, impossible to end, and so we only had that initial part that had been rediscovered, and from Skrjabin's sketches, Russian composer Neptina tried to reconstruct this huge piece that Skrjabin never realized, and he called it Universe. Of course, it sounds like Skrjabin, but we cannot say it is by Skrjabin. It's something else. This idea of the mysterium reflects the atmosphere of the epoch in which the entire world was undergoing profound transformations at the beginning of the 20th century. We also are going through a period of profound transformations. We don't know where we are going, actually. And it represents a generation's desire to change reality through a palingenesis of humanity, and a change that would eventually found its realization through the horrors of World War I. So the Mysterium was supposed to be like a ritual that had to last 7 days, had to be represented in a specific temple that Skrjabin sort of designed, and it had to take place in India, near the Himalaya. And in 2015, in a Buddhist temple, they tried to do something in a Skrjabinesque spirit, but of course it's not. It was like an attempt to. This idea that combines many elements, I won't mention all this, was Skrjabin's personal syncretism, mediated by philosophy and other philosophical readings of sensory, sexual, and spiritual metaphysical components. So, Skrjabin was actually predicting the concept of psychedelic music. We are now used to it. It's a normal thing. But imagine at the beginning of the 20th century. So psychedelic music, I often think, how would Skrjabin feel if he could enter a disco nowadays? Maybe he would be happy, especially if he could use some drugs. as he probably did. It's interesting to notice that, and that's something Pavel Florensky said, that the Mass is in fact a moment, whether Catholic, whether Christian, whether Orthodox, or probably Orthodox, has something special. It's a moment of collective search for mystic ecstasy and catharsis that follows a specific choreography. So we can think of a liturgy as a choreography. I mean, it's a theater, which catalyzes at the same time all senses: hearing, sight, smell, touch, and taste through the blessed bread. So it's very likely that Skrjabin, in his unconscious, he was trying to reproduce through music what he experienced as a child in the Orthodox rites. Thank you. We are almost finished. So this is an example of the performance of Prometheus, psychedelic realization of Prometheus. And we can see that what Skrjabin did, as we heard through the music today, which is bringing tonal harmony to its saturation in the third style and attempting to exceed the limits of our perception through synesthesia, are very much connected. And nothing came out of nothing. Skrjabin was very much influenced by Wagner, although of course they said no. I spoke with many scholars. No, he's Russian. What does that mean? He took almost it. So communism is not Russian; it comes from Germany. So also Skrjabin's idea of synesthetic art comes from Wagner, from the concept of Gesamtkunstwerk, and of course it's brought to the extremes, exactly through an idea of humanity catharsis, this palingenetic idea. Of course, in Wagner it was much more controlled within an artistic and philosophical frame. Okay, the last. Skrjabin declared that at the beginning of history, the human race only knew a chaotic total art in which different elements were mixed in a state of disorder, forming a confused texture of visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and other sensations that could not be distinguished one from the other. And modern neuroscience has observed that prenatal connections between the temporal lobes, processing auditory information, and the visual cortex located in the occipital lobe are very much connected. I mean, they are connections. In other words, newborn senses are not well differentiated. We talk in terms of synesthetic confusion. So, according to neuroscientist Oliver Sacks, in adults, synesthesia seems to go with an unusual degree of cross-activation between what in most of us are functionally independent areas of the sensory cortex. Such cross-activation could be based on an anatomical excess of neural connections between different areas of the brain. And in this perspective, Skrjabin art sounds like a metaphor, an artistic metaphor of two things. One, a desired reconnection to the dawn of human history. And at the same time, a return to the state of bliss we all experience in the prenatal phase of our existence.